Little Planet by Thorp McClusky. Chapter 1. On the Asteroid. It was midnight. 10 minutes ago it had been noon. 5 minutes from now would come the dawn. The day was 20 minutes long. Old Joel Rutledge, silvery-haired and pasty-faced now from the long months in space, lay on his bunk in Black Thom Arnold's small spaceship's single tiny sleeping cabin. Old Joel was listening intently for some expected sound. Even his faded blue eyes, as though he could hear as well as see with them, were riveted on the half-closed beryllium steel door set in the curving ribbed bulkhead wall. At last, the soft chuck of the inner airlock door 20 feet away told him that Black Thom was leaving the ship. He would not, of course, hear the outer door close. He waited until the faint electric blue sunlight lancing down the narrow corridor told him that dawn had come. Then, quickly, he swung his long, emaciated legs over the side of the bunk. In long, effortless, gliding strides, he floated from the cabin into the corridor and forward into the control room. Within the control room, he wasted no time. He did not even glance through the quartz port at the weirdly desolate landscape that sloped away from beneath the ship's nose like the side of a tremendous mountain incredibly rooted in nothing but star-studded blackness. Swiftly, with definite purpose, he went directly to the panels of control switches and dials set to the right of the port, almost in the nose of the ship. Hurriedly, his trembling old fingers loosed the clamps that held a section of fibroglass over a panel, swung the panel open, and fumbled for a brief instant within the complexity-jammed compartment. Then he withdrew his hand, replaced the transparent panel in its rubberoid socket, and retightened the clamps. Turning, he returned as quickly as he had come to the cabin he shared with Black Thom and lay down upon his bunk. After listening furtively for a moment and hearing no sound, he reached beneath his air mattress and drew out a small, thin steel disc, an ordinary emergency meteorite patch. From within his metasilk shirt, he produced a small sliver of diamond-hard metalloy and began at once feverishly making deep scratches in the meteorite patch with that odd writing implement. And as he wrote, he listened with the sharp-eared alertness of one who knows that death stalks close, listened for the grating sounds of the opening airlock that would warn him of Black Thom's return. Meanwhile, Black Thom Arnold, a fine mesh link chain sack lying close by on the pitted and riven nickel stone of this numberless, nameless asteroid, was attacking with pick and electro-flame torch the vein of raw platinum that lay at his feet. It was slow work. The tiny asteroid's gravity was so meager that with every stroke of the pick, Black Thom's body recoiled aloft the full length of a fine steel cable anchored to a steel pin wedged in the metal-seamed rock, sank back each time with grotesque maddening slowness to the asteroid's surface. 2. Although the superbly insulated spacesuit Black Thom wore protected him with almost 100% efficiency from both the crackling fury of the sun and the absolute cold of space, it also retained his accumulating body heat. After a mere 10 minutes' labor, salty rivulets of sweat were streaming from every pore. The vacuum window in his space helmet kept clouding over. Every few minutes he had to pull his arms out of the rubberoid sleeves and mop the inside of the quartz glass with a bit of dry rag. Black Thom, whose disposition and temper were as sinister as his name, alternately cursed and grumbled and gloated to himself. "Joel Rutledge, the damned old fool!" He chuckled softly as he watched the bright arc from the electro-flame torch cut through the naked platinum like soft cheese. "To believe that I'd ever be satisfied with half the metal! He was broke when I found him, down and out, without even metal enough in his pockets to pay for a bed at a space rat flophouse, or a pint of Earth whiskey, let alone a room at the Grand Hotel Mloth, or a pitcher of Wool. said that somebody had grabbed his ship while he was outfitting. Well, that was probably true enough. Briefly, he grinned, stood erect to wipe the sweat from his eyes. Half the metal, while I furnish the ship, pay the expenses, and dig the platinum besides. Damned old weakling. To get so sick that I have to do all the work. Half the metal. Faugh! The grin became a cruel, cunning leer. With a flick of a rubberoid-protected finger, Black Thom shut off the valve at the throat of the electro-flame torch. For an instant, the nozzle still glowed whitely, and then faded swiftly as its accumulated heat was dissipated into the incredibly cold rock. Black Thom dropped greedily to his knees and commenced stuffing the mesh chain sack with the sheared platinum ore. The sack full, he rose to his feet, unfastened his safety cable from the wedged pin, and started for the ship. He left the almost empty electro-flame torch where it lay. It was no longer worth the fuel weight it would cost to transport it to Earth. Back beside the little 60-foot ship, Black Thom opened the outer airlock port, bundled the sack of ore through the small circular aperture, and clambered inside. Sealing the vacuum-walled outer door, he manipulated a valve that released air from within the ship into the airlock. When the air had finally ceased hissing into the small chamber, he shut off the valve and waited a few more minutes while the interior warmth of the ship permeated the airlock. Not until then did he clumsily clamber from his bulky spacesuit and place the limp garment in its rack on the steel-ribbed wall. Last of all, he opened the inner airlock and entered the true interior of the ship. Dumping the bag of platinum ore into the tiny cargo hold, he sighed greedily. The hold was now full to the brim with lumps of the dull, metal-streaked rock. With an avaricious grunt, he slid shut and fastened the grating over the platinum. For an instant, he bitterly regretted that the hold was so small, for he knew that, with his scant knowledge of space navigation, he would never be able to find this mountain of precious metal again. And old Joel Rutledge, damn him, was too cunning to plot the asteroid's orbit on paper. Yes, Black Thom Arnold well knew that once this incalculably rich mass of rock and metal vanished from his sight in the depths of space, it would be lost to him forever. Yet, after all, what matter? The ore he had already secured would make him, if all went well, one of the wealthiest men in the system. With a deceptively genial smile on his wolfish countenance, he sauntered into the cabin. Old Joel Rutledge, wan, sunken-cheeked, turned rheumy eyes toward the open doorway as Black Thom entered. "The hold's full," Black Thom announced abruptly, bearing long yellow fangs in an amiable grin. "Enough white metal to make us both rich for the rest of our lives. We're blasting off for Earth at once." He paused, his eyes narrowing to thin slits as he stared at the old man. "Smile, old one, damn you! Why don't you smile?" Slowly, wanly, cryptically, old Joel Rutledge smiled. "We're blasting off for Earth at once, hey, Black Thom? For Earth, where we'll both be rich for the rest of our lives. Sure, I'm smiling, Black Thom, not so much because of my own good fortune, but because of what my share of this wealth will mean to Wilma, my widowed sister, and my motherless daughter, Noreen. 19 years old, Noreen is now, Black Thom, and I haven't seen her since she was 12. 7 Earth years is a long time for a man to spend blasting about among the asteroids without a strike. Black Thom, it was in the stars that I should find this metal at long last. I've told you how my sister and daughter have been living through those weary years, the woman and girl struggling out a bare existence on a miserable little free claim in the Oregon district. Oh, I've told you all this before, Black Thom. Why should I repeat it now? You know my only wish, that even should I not live to see Earth again, my share of the metal is to go to my daughter. I've written, and you've witnessed my will." Black Thom nodded shortly. He was beginning to be irritated by the old man's sentimentality. You'll live to see Earth, old one, never fear, he insisted jovially. Still, he added slyly, you should make more of an effort to get this asteroid's orbit plotted on paper. You never know what might happen, and your daughter, of course, would always be entitled to half the profits from the asteroid's metal. Old Joel slowly shook his head. I don't feel strong enough now, he whispered. Later in the voyage, if I'm able. No slightest expression of disappointment crossed wily Black Tom's saturnine face, but inwardly he was seething with cold, frustrated rage. Shall I strap you in your bunk while we blast off? He asked abruptly. Again old Joel shook his head. It won't be necessary. You can use moderate acceleration. This pebble we're on has little gravity. You understand your orientation. Point toward Jupiter, behind and to the east of the sun. Line Uranus up astern and 15 degrees to port. That's right. You better angle about 30 degrees toward Vega from the plane of the ecliptic until we're well out of the asteroid belt. Is that necessary? It's not necessary, but it's common sense. All right, Black Tom said sourly. Briefly, he glanced about the cabin to reassure himself that all movables were secure in their clips. Then he went out into the corridor, closed the door, and jammed down the retaining clamps. Alone, old Joel Rutledge lay quietly in his bunk, staring thoughtfully at the steel-ribbed ceiling. Then a dry, muffled rattling began astern. The small ship trembled, jerked slightly. Swiftly, the rattling increased until it was a roar that set everything within the ship, human flesh and blood, the dials on the instrument panels in the control room, the tightly packed platinum ore in the cargo hold, even the welded hull itself, into terrific, jarring vibration. Chapter 2. The Murder. 35 days later, the Earth-Moon system crept out of the sun's glare into visibility. Black Tom Arnold, sitting alone before the heavy quartz port in the control room, quietly cursed, for old Joel Rutledge still lived. There was no possibility now that he would die a natural death before the landing on Earth. Now's as good a time as any to get rid of him. Black Tom, squinting through the circular port at the familiar pair of brilliant crescents ahead, mused. I don't need his damn reckoning from now on to get me to Earth. That was true. With Earth less than 1,000,000 miles away, all that Black Tom, who was long on violence but deplorably short on space navigation, had to do was merely keep the nose of his ship on the planet, and he would soon be home. But the problem of disposing of old Joel was considerably more ticklish. It would have to be murder now, but it couldn't look like murder. Black Tom knew full well that he would have to bring the body in. He couldn't just dump it through the airlock and let it drift away through space. That would be, in the eyes of the Earth authorities, positive proof of foul play. There was a definite, set procedure that had to be rigorously carried out in the event of space death. The proper entries had to be made in the logbook, the body had to be placed in a spacesuit and kept attached outside the ship at all times except when the rockets were actually firing. Bodies have even been transported from Neptune to Earth under such circumstances and without perceptible decomposition. Black Tom was confident that he could make old Joel's murder appear like a natural death. There was an old trick he had learned in his youth from a Eurasian space rat. It was an oriental refinement of murder that, except in a most painstaking investigation, would pass undetected, and the investigation of a supposedly penniless old space prospector's death would be mere perfunctory routine, Black Tom knew. Chuckling softly to himself, Black Tom got up and walked into the galley, where he filled 2 Fibrotex bowls with a mixture of food concentrate and water. Then, from the medicine cabinet, he took a single harmless sedative tablet, which he carefully crumbled into powder and stirred into the thick broth in one of the bowls. Placing metalli spoons in the 2 dishes, he picked them up and walked down the corridor to the cabin. Hungry, old one? Black Thom grunted genially as he entered. "I brought you supper. Earth is big in the sky, old one. Thank the stars that we won't have to down very many more messes of this hogwash." He came across the metal-ribbed cabin, set one of the bowls on the edge of old Joel's bunk, and, lifting the other to his lips, noisily siphoned up the unsavory-tasting stuff. The old man said nothing, but after a moment's hesitation, he rolled over on his side and drank his food. When he had finished, he lay back again and stared thoughtfully at Black Thom. "You know," he said abruptly, "it has occurred to me several times that you might be planning to murder me before we reach Earth and claim my share of the metal for yourself." Black Thom, the two empty bowls in his hands, stiffened into instant tableauesque immobility. Through a long moment he did not move. Then he relaxed and laughed harshly. "You're space mad, old one," he said in a queer, strained, unnatural voice. "You'd better forget such fantasies. Doze off and get some sleep. A few hours' sleep will do you good." He turned abruptly to leave the cabin. "Wait!" The command was so surprisingly strong, so unexpectedly vibrant, that Black Thom felt an involuntary thrill of apprehension strike through him as he halted. "Well?" Black Thom growled. Old Joel spoke softly, but with a curious premonitory assurance. "Black Thom, you are weak in space navigation. It is possible that you might need my assistance in landing this ship. Perhaps it would be best to plan now to have me in the control room while we are entering Earth's atmosphere and landing. Even though I'm too weak to help you in any way with the controls, my brain is still alert, and in the event of an emergency, you might discover that two heads are always better than one." "Very well," Black Thom, in apparent acquiescence, agreed. "Before we start to spiral in, I'll carry you into the control room. You'd better get some rest now. There aren't many hours left." Drowsily, old Joel nodded. Surprisingly, his fear of Black Thom had left him. He only felt overpoweringly sleepy. His eyelids felt heavy as neutronium. He let them sag warily shut, and in an instant he was asleep. For a moment, Black Thom stood silently watching him. Then, with a satisfied nod, he stalked from the cabin forward to the control room. Best to wait a little while until the drug had thoroughly permeated old Joel's system. There must be no mark of struggle on the aged man's body when Black Thom surrendered it to Earth's space police. After an hour had passed, he returned quickly down the narrow corridor and re-entered the cabin. Old Joel lay supinely in his bunk, snoring heavily and slowly. Black Thom slapped the old man's face hard, but the exhausted, aged muscles beneath the sunken flesh did not even twitch. Grinning, Black Thom climbed onto the bunk and knelt above old Joel's unconscious body, facing his head. He reached out strong, predatory hands and carefully placed his thumbs on the carotid arteries on each side of old Joel's shriveled neck, in the soft, vulnerable spots at the base of the skull, just behind the ears. His forearms knotted as he pressed his thumbs in, hard. He remained kneeling there for a long time, motionless as an image cut from stone, watching the slow, shallow movements of old Joel's chest and the feeble, fluttering pulse in his throat. When at last old Joel had ceased to breathe, and his pulse had stopped forever, he clambered off the dead body and stood flexing his aching thumbs and wrists. The murder accomplished, he returned to the control room, where he removed a number of pages from the ship's log and replaced them with an equal number of pages he had previously prepared. The log now looked perfectly in order, yet it clearly and plainly stated that old Joel had died of natural causes while the ship was still 60 million miles from Earth. Even the sleeping tablet Black Thom had given the aged man was mentioned. Carrying the pages he had taken from the log, Black Thom went back to the cabin and took old Joel's will from the locker. Placing both sets of papers in a metalloid container, he burned them and sealed the container. Finally, he dragged old Joel's body off the bunk, bundled it inside a spacesuit, and, after pausing to put on a spacesuit himself, carried it through the airlock and secured it outside the ship. The cylinder of burned papers he hurled out into space. Months later, he knew, they would fall into the sun. Returning to the cabin, he meticulously remade old Joel's bunk, then paused to consider if he had forgotten anything. No, everything was in order. The job was done. He was safe. Content and whistling softly to himself, he went back into the control room and sat down to consider his good fortune. He was rich at last. There was certainly no doubt about that. Nothing to share with old Joel now. He squinted through the bow port at Earth and Moon ahead. Planet and satellite seemed to grin broadly, benignantly, upon his approaching ship. Everything on all the inhabited planets a man could want would be his now. Rich clothes, exotic foods and liquors and drugs, lovely women. Noreen Rutledge, by Arcturus, but there might be a girl for him, ripe for the taking. Black Thom closed his eyes and mentally recalled the spectral color portrait of the girl old Joel had shown him so many times. A tall, gangling, big-eyed kid when that portrait was placed on metal, but she would be different now. Let's see, she'll be 19. A tasty morsel. I'll swear, and she'll be grateful to me. After all, I picked her father up in a hellhole on Mars at a time when he didn't even have a grain of metal to his name, and was sick besides. I took him to my ship and fed him and clothed him and cared for him until he died, and now I am bringing him back to Earth. All that should make her grateful to me. Of course, and Black Thom chuckled lewdly, the real truth she'll never know. Chapter 3. The Return. It took him only a moment more to decide to land at the Portland spaceport. Old Joel Rutledge had told him innumerable times that the Rutledge Free Claim was only about 50 miles back in the mountains from Portland City, and all ports on a planet are the same to a spaceship coming in from outer space. Why, he could land at Portland City, turn his ship, his log, and old Joel's body over to the space police, get a credit draft against his metal immediately after the government metallurgist had certified that it was platinum, charter a rocket gyro, buy a bottle of voile and a few flashy trinkets, and be out to the girl's place the same day. But life was good. When the ship had approached to within 10,000 miles of Earth, and the home planet, a great black, light-fringed ball, had grown until it filled half the sky, Black Thom brought old Joel's body, stiff now as metal from its exposure to the cold of interplanetary space, back inside the airlock. He didn't trouble to remove the spacesuit. That would be done by the Portland City Space Police. 15 minutes later, the ship whistled into Earth's tenuous upper atmosphere. Black Thom sighed with relief and wiped beads of perspiration from his forehead. There had been one or two very ticklish moments during deceleration, but the remainder of the job would be simple, just a matter of blasting away occasionally with the bow rockets and watching the oceans reel away beneath until he came over the broad expanse of the Pacific. By sheer murderer's luck, he himself would have been the first to admit that he could never have navigated so well. Black Thom's ship came across the southern tip of Africa, diagonally northward across the East Indies and into the dusk that was just deepening over the Pacific. There was no need to steer. The ship was headed straight as a die for the Oregon coast. Black Thom opened up the bow rockets and let her toboggan down into the atmosphere. The ship was dropping fast, but Black Thom didn't mind. He liked these spectacular brute force landings, and there was plenty of reserve fuel in the tanks. He began, from sheer exhilaration, to shout and yell as the bow rocket's drumming rose to a roar, and the wail of the rushing atmosphere changed to a banshee scream. The purplish-green coastline of the Americas rose out of the watery curve ahead. There was this about Black Thom. His mind and body always worked together almost as fast as chain lightning. When he saw the deep bay at the mouth of the Columbia River, he let go with the port rockets and veered the ship in a split second. He screamed down upon the coast like a plunging eagle. The ship came hurtling down upon Portland faster than a bullet fired from a gun. 300 miles from the city, she was still 45 miles up. Black Tom opened the bow rockets another notch and let her fall. Earth came plunging upward with express train speed. 2 miles up and 20 miles to the south and west of Portland City Spaceport, Black Tom threw in the keel rocket switch. The spaceport was only seconds away.
Greg, I've been wondering tonight, will we ever hear from Father again? Will he ever come back to Earth?
In the star-softened, velvety darkness, Greg Morrow turned to peer quizzically and fondly at the slim young girl who was sitting chin-cupped meditatively in hands so close beside him. He smiled somberly and, placing his right arm about her shoulders, drew her closer still. "It's been a long time since you've last seen him, hasn't it, Noreen?"
The girl sighed. 7 years, and he is an old man, Greg. Were it not that I have never received any official notification, I would begin to believe him dead. But there has been no word of any kind. The last letter I had from him was dated over 2 years ago, and it was postmarked Moth Mars. In that letter he hinted that he hoped to return to Earth soon, that he had found platinum on one of the asteroids, but that he was without a ship. He wrote that he was trying to get someone with a spacecraft to go in with him on shares, but there has been no word from him since.
Poor old fellow, young Greg Morrow mused. I hope, for his sake, that he has succeeded.
And I, Noreen Rutledge whispered. It would make him happy, and, oh, Greg, if there were metal enough, he might be able to outfit a ship for us, so we could prospect the asteroids ourselves. You've been so good to me, Greg, helping me out here ever since Aunt died a year ago. But there's no real metal on our free claims, Greg. We can't even get enough ahead to leave this place, or be married.
Greg Morrow's arm tightened about his sweetheart's shoulders. I've passed my interplanetary sub-pilot's examinations. Maybe I'll be called soon. His false optimism did not deceive Noreen. She knew how many months, sometimes years, it took to get on Interplanetary's payroll, how long the great Transspace Company's waiting list of accredited applicants was. In that moment of black despondency, they simultaneously heard the faint, distant drumming of a rocket motor in the black sky. The sound rapidly grew to a roar, culminated in silence as a small rocket helicopter settled to the rocky soil not 100 feet from Noreen's small hut. 2 men in official gray climbed lightly from the ship and walked toward Noreen and Greg. Miss Noreen Rutledge. Both Noreen and Greg had risen to their feet, were standing close together before the hut's steps.
I am Miss Rutledge.
Noreen caught her breath sharply.
You're space police, aren't you? Is it about Father?
Yes, the older of the 2 space officers replied gravely. It's about your father.
Perhaps you'd better come inside,
Noreen whispered. Silently, the girl and the 3 men filed into the small, cheerless hut and sat down. You haven't television here, so we flew out to notify you.
Father's dead,
Noreen choked. The men slowly nodded. Yes, your father is dead. He died en route to Earth, aboard a ship owned and registered by Thomas Arnold, a space prospector and trader. The circumstances of his death are clearly set down in the ship's log. He died peacefully in his sleep. Noreen was crying bitterly. The space officer, feeling acutely uncomfortable, hurriedly continued. But there is other, happier news for you. Aboard Thomas Arnold's ship is a rich cargo of platinum from an asteroid your father discovered and charted. You are a wealthy girl. Miss Rutledge, your father, though he died before he could see you again, has brought you a legacy from the skies. Noreen did not speak, only sat there still, with warm, bitter tears coursing down her cheeks. thanks. Her grief was too new, too overwhelming for her to take any comfort now in her suddenly acquired fortune. Your title to the asteroid is clear, Miss Rutledge. Your father left a will, written with a sliver of metalloy on a meteorite patch, concealed in the mattress of his bunk. Apparently, he distrusted Arnold, and it is a good thing that he did leave this will, for only by perusing it did we learn so quickly of the claim to the asteroid he filed 2 years ago in Mloth, Mars, and of your indisputable title to the asteroid.
But the man, Arnold, Noreen asked wonderingly.
Arnold is also dead. In landing at Portland Spaceport tonight, his ship crashed. Funny thing about that crash, too. When we examined the control panels in the nose of Arnold's smashed ship, we found an ordinary rubberoid glove wedged between the keel rocket distributor points. The most logical explanation is that Arnold, at some point during this last voyage, had been adjusting the timing and, removing the glove to make some particularly delicate adjustment, forgot all about it. For if Arnold had remembered it was there, he could have yanked it out the instant he realized that the keel rockets were not firing. But unfortunately, he didn't remember.